Swiss historian Jacob Burckhardt regarded Leon Battista Alberti as the quintessential Renaissance man. Born in Genoa in 1404, Alberti produced many works on diverse subjects like family, architecture, and painting. In this video, I'm going to analyze one of Alberti's famous treatises on art, De Pictura, or On Painting. He wrote the Latin version in 1435, and he translated it into Italian vernacular in the following year. Alberti's translation of his work into Italian accelerated the dissemination of his humanist ideas. It allowed for a wider audience of artists and patrons because people communicated in their regional dialects, not Latin. This made On Painting one of the most influential and groundbreaking pieces of writing in the Renaissance, particularly for art. The treatise is divided into 3 books. Book 1 is dedicated entirely to mathematics, where Alberti codifies linear perspective. Book 2 focuses more on design, while Book 3 gives advice on how an artist can master all of these skills. I'm going to focus on Book 2, where he talks mainly about the concepts of circumscription, composition, and the reception of light. Suitably, the content of Book 2 builds off of Book 1 and provides the foundation for Book 3. Book 2 is written in first person and has a formal tone, the latter of which helps convey Alberti's seriousness about the subject. He writes clearly and confidently, yet the language is not boring or dull as he uses a lot of figurative language. Sometimes, however, Alberti switches to second person and becomes more conversational as he directly addresses his intended audience, young or beginner artists. For example, he advises them not to pursue painting for the money or the fame, but rather because of passion. The book includes images, figures, and illustrations that help readers visualize what Alberti is saying, especially when it comes to the more mathematical parts. From the start, Alberti is very clear about his stance on painting. He uses a metaphor to convey his admiration for painting, describing it as holding a divine power that can bring back and immortalize the dead. Alberti also frequently references ancient artists as well to show his idolization of painters. For example, Alberti talks about Zeuxis, who gave away his works for free, which shows how artists behave like gods among mortals. Alberti also brings in anecdotes occasionally, like how he personally finds painting extremely gratifying and relaxing. Now I'm going to delve into the content of the book and how it's connected to the larger context of the time. Humanism, a renewed interest in the study of classical antiquity, was a major intellectual movement during the Renaissance. Therefore, Alberti refers to many classical texts, historical figures, and mythological characters from ancient Rome and ancient Greece in his writing. For example, he draws on the ideas of Roman authors such as Pliny the Elder, Quintilian, Cicero, and Plutarch, and references the works of Phidias and Praxiteles. His references to classical authors demonstrates his familiarity and passion for humanist learning and helped bolster the credibility of his ideas. Alberti defines circumscription as the process of delineating the external outlines on the painting. The main mathematical tool Alberti uses in circumscription is called a veil. Essentially, a veil is where the artist divides the drawing surface up into appropriate squares so that he or she can better convert a 3-dimensional object into a flat one, as well as situate it in the correct position according to the intersection points. The use of math was a huge development in Renaissance art because artists could use more effective techniques to render objects with more realism. In contrast, before in medieval art, figures were flat and there was no depth to the paintings. Alberti defines composition as the procedure in painting whereby the parts are composed together in picture. Alberti argues that beauty depended on the relative positions and proportions of these parts. Furthermore, in order to get these positions and proportions right, artists absolutely needed to observe and imitate nature. This was another important element of Renaissance art, the rise of naturalism. In essence, naturalism was derived from humanism because so many ancient Greek and Roman artists also focused on portraying the real world as accurately as possible. For example, as we saw in the sculptures, they aimed to depict the human body in a lifelike manner. In addition to position, Alberti writes that these parts must correspond with each other harmoniously with respect to size, function, kind, and color. For example, figures in motion should have their body parts in the appropriate positions. Moreover, every movement should be beautiful and graceful. Other compositions, Alberti writes, would be ugly to look at. This is in direct contrast to Mannerist art, where figures are often shown in contorted positions with exaggerated proportions, such as in Madonna with a Long Neck by Parmigianino. Lastly, Alberti discusses the reception of light. White and black are the two most important colors artists use to express light and shade, and Alberti focuses on how these two colors are applied. He argues that the most skilled painters know how to manipulate black and white. Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael, and later on Caravaggio, are famous for their use of the technique chiaroscuro, also known as tenebrism, where there is a high contrast between light and dark. Similarly, Alberti emphasizes how painters must observe light in nature in order to master it in painting. In regards to the use of color, Alberti criticizes the excessive use of gold. This is unlike the Italo-Byzantine style, where gold was often used in the backgrounds and halos of Byzantine paintings, mosaics, and illuminated manuscripts. Alberti's treatise on painting was written at a turning point in Italian history and was a breakthrough in art. It set the stage for the creation of Renaissance art for the following centuries. We can see in many famous Renaissance paintings that the artists incorporate the elements of disegno that Alberti writes about in Book 2. Renaissance art is generally very idealistic and realistic, achieved through the use of circumscription, composition, and appropriate rendering of light. On Painting was also extremely unique and influential because it was the first book to codify math and art and the first piece of writing on the theory of painting. Alberti draws upon humanist and naturalist ideas to put together a guide on how to portray objects realistically, and it has persisted even to today. When I was in elementary school art class, I was still learning about the horizon line and vanishing points in drawing. Furthermore, this guide propelled the individualism that arose during the Renaissance. Artists can now learn from the guide by themselves without a master. While reading, I noticed Alberti's self-assured, confident tone. He goes as far as to say that people who don't follow his guide are wrong. Eventually, art did drift away from the rigid rules Alberti outlines with the rise of Mannerism in the 1500s. Nevertheless, On Painting remains one of the most influential works. Alberti was both at once a brilliant artist, a knowledgeable humanist thinker, and a seasoned writer, and this combination of skills made him the perfect person to write On Painting.